When my idea of this video started, I had in my mind the somewhat obvious problems of medicine in the monetary system. Initially, I was only thinking about the corruption between the FDA and pharmaceutical companies, but I was not aware of all the ramifications of these behaviors. In this video, I will show how medicine and the medical system are literally killing you. Let's look at the FDA's mission statement. The Food and Drug Administration is responsible for protecting the public health by ensuring the safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, and by ensuring the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. Harvard study reveals institutional corruption of pharmaceuticals and how FDA cannot be trusted with public safety. The article points out how FDA, who supposedly must be in charge of public health and safety, is nothing more than a puppet ran by giant pharmaceutical and drug companies. The fact is that the medical industry has become a leading cause of death, and just in US annually, 12,000 people die due to unnecessary surgeries, 7,000 people die due to medical errors, 20,000 people die due to other errors, 80,000 people die from infections acquired at the hospitals, and 106,000 people die from adverse side effects of medications. What the fuck? The medical system killing over 200,000 people a year? Well, maybe. If we look at more objective and better conducted studies, we will find closer approximation of deaths that are not as exaggerated. Right? The 225,000 figure from the article was gathered from a publication by Barbara Starfield from Johns Hopkins University and states that if higher estimates are used, the deaths due to iatrogenic causes would range from 230 to 284,000. Also, it concluded that between 4 and 18% of consecutive patients experience adverse effects in outpatient settings, with 116 million extra physician visits, 77 million extra prescriptions, 17 million emergency department visits, 8 million hospitalizations, 3 million long-term admissions, 199,000 additional deaths, and $77 billion in extra costs. Therefore, based on this study, if different estimations are used and deaths in outpatient settings are considered, then the approximation of deaths by the medical industry more than doubles from 225,000 to 483,000 deaths. A recent study conducted in 2016 by Johns Hopkins suggests medical errors are third leading cause of death in US. Analyzing medical death rate data over an 8-year period, Johns Hopkins patient safety experts have calculated that more than 250,000 deaths per year are due to medical error in the US. A different study called A New Evidence-Based Estimate of Patient Harms Associated with Hospital Care estimates that 440,000 preventable adverse events occur every year. Lastly, a well-known research publication titled Death by Medicine by Gary Knoll gives two approximations of deaths caused by the medical industry. As stated on the report, the approximations are based on an analysis of all of the published literature dealing with injuries and deaths caused by government-protected medicine. The first estimation shows that over 783,000 people die every year due to specific conditions of the medical industry. The second estimation uses a different methodology to approximate deaths for adverse drug reactions and medical errors, and shows that almost 1 million people die every year. Let's compare these numbers to homicides in order to get an idea of the magnitude of the problem. FBI records show that in 2015, there were a total of 13,344 homicides in the country, but over 35 to 70 times as many deaths were caused by the medical industry. Media coverage rarely mentions the harmful effects of pharmaceutical drugs or corruption between the FDA and pharmaceutical companies. However, media always talks about gun control as if homicide were a massive problem. In order to shed some light on the behavior of these companies, it is crucial to understand the role the FDA plays. The Harvard study provides the history, evolution, corruption, and negligence between the FDA and pharmaceuticals. Work on what would become the 1938 Food and Drug Law began in 1933 with a bill that would prohibit misstatements in advertising and require manufacturers to prove to the FDA that drugs were safe before being allowed to sell them. The company's two trade associations launched well-choreographed screams of protest and letter-writing campaigns to mislead Congress and to distort its mission to protect its constituents from harm. Employees of drug makers wrote to Congress, arguing that requiring companies to make honest claims about safe drugs would put thousands out of work. The FDA staff wanted the legislation passed, but were stopped by threats of prosecution if they campaigned for it. Then, a manufacturer added antifreeze to a sulfur drug to make a sweet-tasting elixir, and children started dying. Public response trumped industry lobbyists, and Congress passed the 1938 law, requiring that drugs be safe but leaving it to companies to decide how to define and taste for safety. How inconsiderate and senseless can the FDA and congressmen of 1938 be? These illustrious erudites of business find the holy grail of capitalism by making false claims about the drugs, and Congress wanted them to change their hidden methods of making money in the capitalistic society? I repeat, change hidden methods of making money in a capitalistic society? In 1992, after years of underfunding and cuts in the 1980s that contributed to drug review times ballooning from 6 to 30 months, Congress passed the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, authorizing the FDA to collect user fees from drug companies that would allow it to hire 600 more reviewers and thereby speed up drug review. Supporters claimed that fees would increase incentives for innovation and improve health. But aside from clearing the backlog of NMEs waiting for approval, industry fees have not increased innovation as measured by clinically superior drugs. The 1998 withdrawal of 5 drugs used by 19.8 million Americans prompted critical reflection. 3 distinguished physicians were struck by how little information had been gathered about the harmful side effects of these drugs before they were withdrawn. A 15-month investigation by the Committee on Government Reform of the U.S. House of Representatives found a growing laxity in FDA surveillance and enforcement procedures, a dangerous decline in regulatory vigilance, and an obvious unwillingness to move forward even on claims from its own field offices. The resulting 2006 report also documented a 53.7% decline in warning letters. Since then, FDA leadership has shifted to talking about being a partner with industry to get more drugs to patients more quickly. For the reasons we explained above, the proportion of new products with clinical advantages seems to have moved from 1 in 8 down to 1 in 12, while the proportion with serious harms has gone up from 1 in 5 towards 1 in 3 as the number of drugs given priority status increases. Most new drugs approved and promoted since the 1970s lack additional clinical advantages over existing drugs, and as with all drugs, they have been accompanied by harmful side effects. An analysis conducted in 2011, based on a year of adverse drug reactions reported to the FDA, came to similar conclusions as a systematic review of the 39 methodologically strongest studies performed in the US between 1964 and 1995. These are: Americans experienced 2.1 million serious injuries, including 128,000 patient deaths. There is no doubt that Big Pharma is big business, especially in the US, which has 5 of the top 10 companies from 2013. These 5 companies profited $49 billion and spent $48.4 billion of their $208.8 billion total revenue in sales and marketing. And based on FDA's data from 2016, pharmaceutical companies in the US paid the FDA $2.2 billion in user corruption fees. Moreover, these numbers do not consider the money that the pharmaceutical industry spends on doctors, medical schools, and lobbyists. And by the way, pharma was by far the top lobbying industry from 1998 through 2016. It sure seems the more money pharmaceutical companies make, the more deaths there are.